MTN News, this is Montana This Morning.
We'll look into what learning is like today for a class that started kindergarten in the middle of a pandemic.
We make sure that we've got a solid plan in place with our curriculum.
Plus, content creators are weighing in on Montana's TikTok ban.
We don't own these platforms and they can get taken away at any point.
And Sundays are special at One Heights Salon. We'll explain why. Good morning and welcome to Montana This Morning on this Monday, May 22nd. I'm Augusta McDonald. Happening today, President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy are scheduled to hold talks over raising the debt ceiling. This after White House and Republican negotiators were unable to reach a deal over the weekend. The GOP is calling for what amounts to a 13% across-the-board cut in federal spending along with work requirements for entitlements. President Biden cut his overseas trip short in order to be able to negotiate in person. He says Republicans should be open to new tax revenues. One part of a possible compromise includes permitting reform. And while that issue might sound a bit technical, reporter Joe St. George explains how it impacts everything from your commute to your internet connection.
Every now and then, political reporters will pop on your television and talk about something that's, quite frankly, really boring. Something like permitting reform. Well, this is one of those times. Now, before you change the channel, you need to understand why permitting reform really matters. You see, if the country's going to avert a debt ceiling crisis in the coming weeks, it could come down to permitting reform.
It takes much longer to build something here in America than it does in Europe.
To understand why this matters, we sat down with Neil Bradley. He's the Chief Policy Officer at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. This issue is about as boring as watching paint dry. Why does it matter?
Because it matters if you want to build anything in America. On average, it takes about 7.5 years to get a federal permit.
Bradley says the push to build more in the U.S., whether it's a bridge, a highway, a wind turbine, a pipeline, or even broadband internet, has for years taken too long. He points to a planned renovation of Union Station in Washington, D.C. as Exhibit A.
They started the permitting process on that in 2015, and they think they're another 3 years away from even getting final approval.
Why does it take so long? Well, let's say you want to build a project. A federal permit may require you to go to the EPA for an environmental review. You may have to go to the Department of Transportation if it involves travel or commuting. If your land is protected, you might have to go to the Department of Interior or the Department of Agriculture if it involves farming. All usually have different timelines and actual employees capable of signing off.
Then someone can sue to say, I don't think the federal agencies looked at all the right things.
Permitting reform is one area of potential agreement between President Biden and congressional Republicans that could make its way into a deal to avert a default. Some Democrats want it to build renewable energy projects faster. Many conservatives want traditional oil and gas-related projects sped up.
The purpose of these laws is to ensure we look before we leap.
But Lisa Frank with Environment America says changes to permitting shouldn't negatively impact the environment. She worries change could lead to more fossil fuel projects and irreversible mistakes impacting wildlife and habitats.
Typically, once we've built a project, those impacts are kind of locked in.
All of this, something to watch as lawmakers try and strike a debt limit deal. Joe St. George, Scripps News, Washington.
Big story developing out of Washington. We'll continue to follow that this week. But for now, we're back here in Montana where it's a little bit hazy and it's going to be warm.
Yep, another warm day today. Some of us may be pushing another 20 degrees above the norm. Some of us may try to get into the low 90s today. And you had mentioned hazy. Yeah, we're going to have to deal with that wildfire smoke again today. You can see some of it out there right now. We'll tell you more about that here in just a moment. Take a step back in time. Yesterday, our high of 84, well above the norm. 54 above the norm as well. Very mild start out there this morning, too. Yesterday, we had a top gust of 36. Could see some breezy conditions again today. Here in Billings, it was dry yesterday, but we did have some thunderstorms as we got into the afternoon and the evening around the QT viewing area. I think Molt got over 2 inches of rainfall and some pea-sized hail. And we can see more hail in some spots off to our west today. We'll show you that too coming up. Moisture totals for the month and year, we're doing okay. We could always use some more moisture. And we've got daily shots at rain this week. But there's your air quality alert officially until 9 a.m. this morning. That's when we'll get an update. Just looking at the high-res models show that smoke will continue to blow in today. but maybe not so much as we get into the rest of the week. So we got a frontal boundary that's going to come in today. It's going to give us a chance of rain and some thunderstorms, but it's going to help push that smoke out and hopefully keep it at bay for the rest of the week. Right now we're sitting at 57 here at Billings. Another day we're going to stay well above the norm. We'll be seeing cooler temperatures moving forward, but still above average. Lots of stuff to break down with the main forecast, and we will do that coming up here in just a bit.
All righty, Miller, thank you so much.
Okay.
Other headlines out of Billings this morning. Third graders in Billings entered school during a difficult time for learning. Their kindergarten and first grade experiences in some cases upended by the pandemic. And now, as Q2's Andrea Lutz explains, local teachers are racing to get students up to reading grade level before they face more demanding expectations.
Inside this Billings elementary school,
There's high expectations and we strive to meet those.
books are open and active minds are at work.
Well, at third grade, we strive to make sure all students are on benchmark.
Third grade teachers all across the country are at a critical point in the school year, making sure their students are where they need to be academically before summer starts. Teacher Robin Hergenreiter knows that all too well here at Arrowhead Elementary.
Students who are on level by third grade have a much better chance at being successful throughout their future career in school.
Making her job in the classroom essential. School districts nationwide saw an unanticipated obstacle after the pandemic when remote learning peaked. To address that pandemic learning loss, one district in Atlanta added 30 minutes of class time a day as third graders lost ground in reading.
We definitely saw discrepancies between those kids that were remote and those that were actually in the classroom.
Arrowhead Principal Pam Myers says teachers knew coming right out of COVID that students would really need a push.
And we worked on those foundational skills really hard, and that was our focus. So now I feel like we're on the tail end of it, and our third graders have reached where they needed to reach.
Test scores for the last 2 years show the slightest growth in student proficiency in reading for third graders across elementary schools in School District 2. Meyer says educators know from the get-go third grade is a turning point.
We as an education system know that, and so we make sure that we've got a solid plan in place with our curriculum and resources to make sure that we are meeting that goal.
School District 2 opted for remote learning in May to March of 2020, with students coming back into the classroom that following fall. Hergenreiter says then teachers were presented with a literal barrier, masks.
Even just enunciating words to kids when there's a mask in front, of course that's a little bit more challenging.
And as the school year comes to a close, Hergenreiter's feeling accomplished in her Arrowhead classroom.
It's fun to see the learning that's taking place, from the beginning of the year till now.
In Billings, Andrea Lutz, MTN News.
Thank you, Andrea, for that report. And you can help us support childhood literacy in our community. In partnership with the Scripps Foundation and Scholastic Books, Q2 is working to get free books in the hands of kids all across our area. You can, when you donate to give a child a book, you can change a life. And that link right there, ktvq.com/book, will purchase books that go straight into the homes of kids. With Montana's TikTok ban looming, a Billings-based influencer is sharing advice for others hoping to make a living on social media.
This is such a good reminder for content creators to not put all of your eggs in one basket, because we don't own these platforms and they can get taken away at any point.
Kylie Nelson is a full-time fashion influencer encouraging other women to feel comfortable in their skin. She has 200,000 followers on TikTok, the platform responsible for 70% of her brand deals. But she's also growing her Instagram, starting a podcast, and offers social media coaching.
So I'm just going to really keep showing up on all platforms, and worst case scenario, if it does fall through, then we'll just have to focus on all the other platforms. I've put my heart and my soul into the past 2 years of building this page for women to be able to come to get that reminder to give themselves grace and confidence.
The TikTok ban is being challenged in court. Last week, 5 of the app's Montana-based users sued the state, arguing the law is unconstitutional. New this morning, the man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students is scheduled to appear in court today. A grand jury indicted Brian Coburger on 4 counts of first-degree murder. CBS's Jared Hill has the latest.
Today, a return to court is expected for Brian Coburger. The man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students at this off-campus rental home last fall. Just last week, a grand jury indicted the 28-year-old, a PhD criminology student at the time, on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary.
During the arraignment, the charges will be read and he will enter a plea. We expect that will be a not guilty plea.
Prosecutors allege Coburger went to the house in Moscow, Idaho in the early morning hours of November 13th last year, stabbing Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, and Kaylee Gonzalez. He was arrested almost 7 weeks later, hundreds of miles away at his family's home in Pennsylvania.
We know that he was arrested based on cell phone data, based on the make and model of his car, and based, very importantly, on finding his DNA on a knife sheath that was found at the scene.
Legal analysts say despite the strong evidence for the prosecution, there's no clear motive. Also, no actual murder weapon was found at the scene, potentially strengthening any defense. Jared Hill, CBS News.
Last weekend, the University of Idaho awarded posthumous degrees to the students who were murdered. If Coburger does in fact plead not guilty, analysts say it could be 6 months or more before this case goes to trial. Other national headlines this morning. Prior to leaving the G7 summit in Japan, President Biden doubled down on his commitment to stand with Ukraine. The U.S. and its allies are planning to provide Ukrainian pilots with F-16 fighter jets. It'll mark a major step in Ukraine's effort to boost its air defenses against Russia. Moscow says the move will raise questions about NATO's role in the war. Paul Whelan, the Marine vet wrongfully detained in Russia since 2018, spoke to CNN yesterday on a rare phone call from inside a Russian prison. He says he's confident the government will be getting him home, adding he's been told the release of both he and detained journalist Evan Gershkovich are priorities. Whelan admits he's depressed and has aches and pains from forced labor and poor living conditions. He says if Gershkovich is released, he's been promised he won't be left behind. Back here in Billings, a hairdresser is providing a service for kids who might need a little extra consideration. Q2's Alina Howder has more.
For families with kids that have disorders like autism, even a simple haircut can be overwhelming. And that's why One Billings hairdresser holds private haircuts one day out of the month for these kids in the form of Sensory Sundays.
Next, Sensory Sunday. 4-year-old twins Liam and Lane Bernhagen love to play and laugh like any other kids.
Growing so fast, don't know where time has gone.
But these twins are a little different than most.
They are nonverbal and are autistic. We got the diagnosis a little after 2, I think it was around 2.5.
For the twins, a trip to the hair salon can be overstimulating, especially when crowded.
It was hard to find somewhere that, it didn't overwhelm them.
That's where hairdresser Danielle Holtberg comes in.
When I provide my service, there's a couple of my little kids that I just let run around and I cut as they go.
She hosts a monthly Sensory Sunday at Tres Chic Salon in the Heights, where kids and adults with special needs can receive a private haircut.
All right! It's not just autism, not just sensory processing, not just Down syndrome, but those that were born with mental disabilities as well.
Danielle came up with the idea a year ago, taking from her own personal experience.
Being a mom of a special needs kid is very tough. There's not a lot of avenues out there.
She hopes to provide a safe space for these kids and adults that might need it the most.
Oh, I guess that feels good, he says. I just want to be that understanding person, and I wish I was more for my own son, but if I can just change the lives of so many others, my son has so much support and love.
And the families couldn't be more grateful.
She's just very supportive and really can't imagine going through this whole process without her.
In Billings, Alina Howder, MTN News.